want to interrupt the applause. We've reached the end of time, but with assuming permission from the conference organisers, I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to ask the panellists to restrict your remarks to one sentence or one idea, if you would, which is just to say, you know, we have seen city leaders working together internationally on things like the climate agenda, just to take an example. Is there a particular thing that you'd like to see city leaders doing, working together internationally on the migration and mobility agenda? Is there something that needs to be done more at a global level? Just tell us one idea each, if you would, and we'll start, if we may, with The Hague.
Yes, I would like to do that, and I would set one aspect on the agenda, and that is we are a European Union now, but that means that from now on until the end of times, all the citizens of Europe can migrate the way they want. And it happens in The Hague now at this moment very straightforward, with tens of thousands of people from Poland, etc., coming to The Hague. So that's a question from now. Maybe because of there's a big recession, especially in a country as Spain. There are young people. I heard the unemployment is about 50% around for young people in Spain at this moment. Maybe there's a lot of Spanish young people going to other cities, other countries, like maybe The Hague or Amsterdam or Paris. I don't know. So that kind of movements of inhabitants of the European Union is something of the future, and I think we have to face it. We have to discuss it. What's the influence of the cities? How to deal? How to cope with it? And make an agenda for it, and do not deny it, because otherwise all the inhabitants are going against the development of the European Union in the future.
Thank you. So a European Union framework for cities, both cities that gain and cities that are losing population through migration. Vijaya?
My plea would be to look at semantics. When we talk about migration, it is not a negative connotation. We talk about mobility. It's about mobility, not just highly skilled immigrants, but we are actually talking about increasing nations' competitive advantage. So it's a win-win and not a win-lose. And I would also use the word, we use the word often, we say tolerating diversity, unless the entire political realm, the leaders that was being referred to, talk about harnessing diversity for a win-win across the world, will be a better way to look at it. Leave the religious issues or leave the fundamental issues, that's another problem. But when we talk about economic well-being, we talk about social well-being, let's look at the language carefully, and maybe by end of this tonight's program, if we can have a few words that actually talk about what it means to add to our strength, I'll be quite happy to look at that.
Great, so change the language. Can we hear from Barcelona, please, Daniel?
Yes, one sentence. I would like to point the importance of the role of local government on shaping global policies. I think if for example, in Europe, we are sharing, for example, the working group of migration of Eurocities. I think it's a great job. But I think if European policies, for example, they would hear more about what are the local governments saying, maybe we would see general policies sometimes more coherent and more realistic and more direct to reality. So there is some gap here, and I think the importance of the role of local government is my plea.
Thank you very much. Julia?
I think my message would be, don't be complacent and assume that you can either bury your head in the sand and avoid thinking about this, or that the gains you've made are going to stick, because mobility means that people can leave your city as fast as they can come. But the other thing that has crossed my mind a lot being here is the need for city leaders, civic leaders, to situate themselves within the global context and understand what is going on in other parts of the world. And if we do want to have a win-win, we have to be thinking of where people are coming from and where they're going to go to, and I think of people in the southern hemisphere as well. And I'm not sure we do that enough. I think we tend to think of our own little world as a planet, and it's not the true planet.
Thank you very much. Honourable John Stefano?
Having just said that I don't believe that every winner needs a loser, I want to contradict myself, which I can do as a politician, and say this, which is the best thing the other nations of the world could do for my city, is to close themselves to immigration, because it'll drive talent to our community. So I would say this, particularly for elected leaders, that we have a great opportunity to practice a politics of optimism, that we're growing, that we're stronger, and that we do so together, and that we go out and directly engage in that.
Thank you very much. And Sir Richard Leese, please.
I'm struck by the number of references to language in different ways in this discussion. John talked about language not being or speaking language not being a requirement of citizenship, and I agree with that, but it is an issue for inclusion, and it's particularly an issue for the inclusion of women. And in a city like Manchester, women in immigrant communities who don't speak English are far more likely to be economically excluded as a consequence of that. So a lot of our interventions go into teaching English to people who arrive. And what that sort of leads to, because like John, I want to encourage people to continue coming, is that if we assume that we're going to move into this increasingly economically mobile world, that I think part of what cities need to start doing is not only preparing our citizens for living in our own city, but start preparing citizens for when they are going to move wherever they are going to move to.
Thank you very much indeed. So, colleagues, we've heard a number of things from our city leaders. It's impossible to summarise them, but a couple of points I've taken is that, firstly, migration and mobility is not just an opportunity, it is that, but it's actually a fundamental driver for much of the success of these cities. That these are, if you like, impossible to imagine a successful city that doesn't become more diverse in the process. The second thing we've heard them say is that multi-party activity is key. Huge range of stakeholders, but also that without multi-party activity, you're not going to achieve that inclusion, nor are you going to leverage that competitive advantage, whether it's business or not-for-profits or others. The third thing we've heard them say is that locally elected leaders have to take the lead. It has to be part of the story of the city and its future, and that can only come from the directly elected representatives of the city. And then lastly, we've heard, I think, that there is definitely a global role for city government, partly because of the flows between places, but partly because, as Richard Leese just said, that migration is a kind of permanent dynamic now, and we have to prepare our citizens not just to do well in the city where they live now, but where they might live in the future as well. So with that, if you would, I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking Julia Deans, Honourable John Destefano, Sir Richard Leese, Deputy Mayor Marnix Norder, Daniel de Torres, Commissioner Daniel Torres, and Vijaya Vaidyanath. Thank you very much indeed to our city leaders.